Hey, it's Eric Rains. Honored to have been a part of Randomness with Heath and Josh. But when it comes to podcast, if you're looking for all the info, if you're looking for laughs and stories, special guests, and of course, if you're looking for some Central Texas flair and some flavor, make Monday something to look forward to. Turn in with my friends right here, Randomness with Heath and Josh. This episode brought to you by...
Looking to escape the ordinary and explore the extraordinary? Meet Jani Kovacevic, your personal luxury travel expert. Whether you're craving an epic expedition to the Arctic, a sun-soaked all-inclusive getaway, or a once-in-a-lifetime trip with the whole family, Jani curates every detail for a seamless, unforgettable experience.
From bucket list adventures to multi-generational family vacations, she tailors travel to your pace, your passions, and your people, with luxury every step of the way.
Don't just travel, explore in style, discover with ease, and make memories that last forever.
Call 254-721-2000 or visit travelbyjani.com and start planning your dream escape today.
They'll talk about anything and to anyone. They're straight out of the streets of Temple, Texas. It's Randomness with Heath and Josh.
All right, we're back. What's going on, Joshua? I said Joshua this time. I've been meaning to say that. I haven't said Joshua in a while. I caught myself listening back.
And it is Randomness with Heath and Josh.
Josh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, Joshua was always like when your mom or dad was yelling at you because you're in trouble.
That's right. And the middle name comes with it.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's when I knew when I was in trouble because I go by my middle name. And then my parents would always just scream at me as Heath. They really didn't scream at me, to be honest. But my sister, Brandon Heath. And I was like, oh, crap, what did I do? But anyway, she still does that. But anyway, so it's been a week. We haven't talked much, but nothing's been going on in my life too much. Anything going on with you?
Man, nothing. Just, you know me, the school stuff.
School. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was like looking through, doom scrolling the other day and came across this post on Facebook with this meteorologist guy. And he was showing a map of all of the people out there chasing storms. And there's like little dots on the map on the roads, that showed the positions of all these storm tracker people. It looked like a traffic jam. It's crazy. It's like they were saying it's getting so congested now. It's like almost dangerous to be out there.
Probably easier to do nowadays, right? To do that because of technology.
I'm sure, yeah, with the mobile broadband and whatnot. But the other thing he said is he ran across families that are going on vacations to do this kind of thing.
Huh.
So they're not even they're not scientists, they're not meteorologists, they're not even storm chasers. They're just
hoping to see it.
They're a family chasing the storm. Like,
I guess our buddy, what was the guy we had on the storm chaser? Adam Culver. I wonder if he's one of those dots.
Oh, I'm sure. So, and he's probably like, look at all these people. What's going on?
Yeah, no, right on. All right, it's been just, I guess, a slow week for both of us. I really haven't got a whole lot going on either, to be honest. Well, I mean, I'm always working on the podcast stuff, but I mean, besides that, but it is the end of the year, so it's like Riker's
graduation time.
Yeah, he's actually just got back from playing in the band for the graduation of the seniors tonight. And so this comes out later. It's going to be like a week or so after this already happened. So you're like, why are you talking about graduation 2 weeks later? Well, that's why. But anyway, he it's just everything's the end. Like he tested out, so he doesn't have to take any of his finals or anything. So that's really nice. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to all the traffic every morning going back and forth to work to die down because everybody's not going to school anymore. Sadly, that's what I look forward to at the end of the school year. But,
yeah, you're the red dot on the map.
Yeah, the red dot on the map. Yeah, right.
It's like you complain about traffic, but you are traffic.
Yeah. Oh, I know what. You remember the guy I told the story about that work that came and he was trying to bathe with Comet. in our bathroom at our work. Remember that
What?
story I told not too long ago? It was one of the stories I told at the beginning. Well, of one of our episodes, probably 5 or 10 episodes ago. Well, anyway, that guy showed up again this week. I forgot about that, so I had to chase him down. I'm like, he's a homeless guy, and I'm like, dude, you can't go in there and destroy our bathroom and whatever, and use Comet to clean yourself is probably not a good idea anyway. Which is so weird because there's hand soap in there.
Yeah.
But he chooses the Comet that they use to clean the sink and the toilet to bathe himself in. I'm like, what are you doing? What is it that you have on you that needs to get off?
I grew up using Comet.
yeah.
I
But
know
it's
it.
like the old Comet, yeah. But anyway, that's the only thing that's been going on. It's been pretty quiet, even at work. But I'm working at work this week by myself because my counterpart is on an Alaskan cruise. So
Nice.
so this week's going to be a crazy week. But so I'll have stories for next week probably. All the craziness that goes on when I'm there by myself instead of having somebody there to help me. But anyway, that's all I got.
All right.
So I actually flubbed up last week and I said it's episode 154, and it wasn't. It was episode 153, but I didn't change that, so you heard me say 154. So now it's episode 154, and we've brought in someone that I've known for a long time. We're not real close friends, but his son was on our show, Seth Lee. So welcome in the king of dad lore, Mike Lee. What's going on, Mike?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Glad to be here.
Hey,
How
welcome.
you doing, man? You doing good?
Yeah, doing good. Life in LA, trying to adjust to, adult kids and now having grandkids and all of that what that entails. And, waking up a little bit harder, wishing I had a little more sleep, a little more gray in the beard as we all have. And, just adjusting to life.
Right on. Well, we had you on. I'd actually had you on my list for a while. We just hadn't got there yet, and I had put out something, and I think you must have saw that, and you're like, "Hey, man, I have a hell of a story," and you sent me this list, and I'm like, "You sure do." So why don't you want to come on the show? So I'm gonna kind of start at the beginning because we have been talking off and on over the last few years and stuff. But you're not originally from Temple, right? Can you kind of do a little bit of your background?
No. Yeah. So I grew up in Wichita Falls, Texas, right? So
Okay.
was born there. My mom was a young teenage mom, which I guess history always repeats itself. But my mom had me when she was 16, so I kind of grew up in Wichita Falls, a little bit of a poor neighborhood, with an ornery stepdad, which we can go into later, and and then as life, transpired for the young Mike Lee, right? A lot of, kind of tragic stuff happened with, both my parents becoming addicted to heroin and all types of crazy stuff that, led me to being in the foster care system for a while. And then, eventually, with some great stories, my great grandmother, a phenomenal woman named Dixie, and my grandmother got custody of me when I was 11, and we moved to Temple, Texas.
Wow.
Well, why Temple though?
Well, so they were both already in Temple, right? And so one time, after a kind of one of the nightly beatings that my grandmother got to witness when I was a child, so she was like, "Okay, you're going to tell your mom that you're just going to go to Temple, right? And for Christmas. And then when you get there, you're going to call your mom. You're going to tell her, oh no, I'm just living with I'm going to live with Nanny now." And she was like, and so, which I did. And about 4.5 hours later, my mom showed up, going, "Hey, you're kidnapping my son." My great grandmother, God rest her soul, Dixie, who was a fiery spark plug who, she married 7 times and all of them died before her. So that tells you kind of what kind of life she lived. She punched my mom square in the face. and eventually, that kind of led to, like CPS being called and all types of stuff, which, put me on a different path. Right. So, and I struggled for years with like, man, it's such a horrible upbringing, but it led me to Temple, Texas. Right. And so, which is where, all the great things in my life have kind of happened because of those moments. Right. So I always try to take, like, regardless of the upbringing and being poor and beaten and, running away from home when I was 8 years old and foster care and all of that nonsense.
Wow.
And I always took that as like, okay, that's preparing me for something better.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And certainly it did. Right. And so, one of the interesting stories is I actually, kind of recently, about 4 years ago, took all those stories, right, that my kids are always hearing about my upbringing. And I wrote that into a screenplay about an 8-year-old boy running away from home, in Wichita Falls, Texas. Because when I was 8, here's one of the dad lore stories, right? So I was 8 years old. It's the middle of winter, just got the crap beaten out of me. And so I was wearing cargo shorts and a hoodie, and I had a Bible in my left pocket and a freaking letter opener in my right pocket. And my entire thing was I was going to walk to the Wichita Falls airport and stow away on an airplane to get to Temple, Texas, so I could live with my grandmother.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't the brightest of moves, right? But I always tell the story because this is actually the opening of my screenplay. So as I'm walking, alone in the middle of the night, winter, freezing my tail off, and I see this gas station up ahead, and I'm seeing the lights off the airplanes, kind of taking off. So I kind of know generally where the direction is. And I'm pulling up and I'm walking up and I see this gas station up ahead. And it's one of those old Texas gas stations, with the buzzy lights, overhead, that have all the bugs and gnats flying around. And there's a phone booth in the parking lot, and it's that uneven type of pavement. And this African-American guy pulled up in a car, and he had like this cap on that was backwards, an older gentleman. And he was like, "Hey, what's going on, kid? Like, you look pretty cold." Now, my dumb self, 8 years old again, was like, "Yeah, it's pretty cold." And he was like, "Where are you headed?" I'm like, "I'm going to the airport." He's like, "Why don't you hop in my car and I'll give you a ride?"
Oh,
I actually got in the car, and because I was like, he's going to give me a ride to the airport. And so the guy, and the car, I remember it distinctly, right? It still had the smoke from the tailpipe because it was so cold in the winter. It was an old kind of beat up green Chevy. And, this guy was, asking me all these types of questions. I was like, "Yeah, I'm stowing away on an airplane." He's like, "I got a friend that works at the airport. Let me call him. And then I will, get you a plane ticket." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's awesome." So he goes behind us to the phone booth, and I'm watching the guy in the rear view mirror and the side mirror going, "Okay, what's going on?" And again, I've got my Bible and my letter opener, and I'm watching this guy behind me, and he picks up the phone, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'm probably going to die." But I get back in the car, and he was like, "Hold on just a second. My friend's going to call me in just a second. And, we'll see if we can get you a ticket." About 2 minutes later, the cops showed up because he had called the cops. And that actually that was one of the reasons why my grandmother's got custody of me, because that guy had, called the cops. And that was the first instance of, abuse on my file and everything like that. So, shout out to the guy that I don't remember his name, but I immortalized him in a screenplay talking about, that story and that chance encounter of, the dumb little kid who could have not been here.
right.
Well, yeah, that could have gone a lot of different ways.
So,
Wow.
Here
That's
I am.
Crazy. That's crazy. So just kind of going back to your parents and stuff. So do you know your dad, your real dad?
Yeah. So I know my real dad. And what's interesting is he and I did not talk from the time I was about 5 years old until I got married, right?
Oh, wow.
And he showed up at my wedding randomly.
Wow.
Gave me $500 and, introduced me to my sister, my half sister.
Wow.
And then I went, several years without talking to him again, which he recently passed away. And, we never really connected. I do have a picture where Seth was competing in a martial arts tournament in Dallas. And, I reached out to him, was like, "Hey, I know you live in Dallas. Why don't you come see your grandson compete in martial arts? And, I'll be there." So we had this kind of 3-generation picture, and I'll always kind of cherish that.
Right.
But we never really had like a bond. And so,
Right.
And I think that there's, one of the things I always tell people is that, you're never a product of your environment. You're always a product of your choice. Right. a lot of people always try to blame, like, oh, I grew up in this, so this is why I'm X, right?
Sure, yeah.
And I'm like, no, because you've had every opportunity, every day, you have a chance to make a choice, right? And so it was the lack of fatherly influence, right? Like I said, I grew up with my grandmothers. My stepdad was super abusive. I never knew my dad. But all of that was kind of what led me to knowing that when I grew up, I wanted to be the best dad possible. So,
Sure.
When my kids were growing up, I made sure I was at every soccer practice. I was at every school event. I worked from home so that I could pick them up from school. I helped them with every project. Seth and I traveled around the country because I just wanted to be, that dad that they knew that they could always count on.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. What about your mom? Is she still living or?
No. Here's another dad lore story, right? This is kind of interesting. So my mom, when Seth was born, right? My mom, I was still married at the time. My mom had me when she was 16. I was 30. She was 46. And my stepdad, and they had actually moved to Temple. I was living in Austin at the time. They had moved to Temple into a trailer right in front of my grandmother. My mom was taking care of my grandmother, and she wanted to reconcile with me and the kids. And of course, I told them, I was like, look, I'm willing to let bygones be bygones, but if there's any indication of drugs or alcohol around my kids, I just won't stand for it, and we'll be done. And, for years while all of that went on, my stepfather and I constantly battled, and he was always like, and he, me, right? I was not a small guy in high school, right? I'm
No.
6'3", 220, built like a linebacker back then. And, and he was not. And so he used to always threaten me and challenge me as he was going to be. And when I was little, I used to remember praying that, oh, one day I'm going to be big enough to beat this guy's ass, right? That was the whole thing. Because I was a little kid and I grew up, I think seventh grade as 5'7", 90 pounds of nothing. And then always used to pray that I would be big enough to beat his ass. And that was my big thing. Well, so when I was 30, my stepfather called and said, your mom is gone. She died. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I got Barb and the 3 kids in the car. We drove to Temple and we were going to, and keep in mind, before that, I missed an important part of that story is 6 months before that, my daughter had said, oh, I caught them, drinking. So I cut them off and was like, okay, that's it. You're done. So for 6 months, didn't talk to my mom. But then he calls and says, hey, your mom died. So I drive up to their place. Again, it's a trailer park in Temple, Texas, and go in the house, and he's sitting there, and this is a man who caused me just all types of trouble in my life, and and I'm telling me about my mom and my wife and kids are all there, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'd like to have an autopsy just to make sure it wasn't a drug overdose, that it was indeed a heart attack. I need to know for my own self. And he started yelling at me and saying you're not going to get that. And I yelled back and I was like, look, and I was like, he's like, you can get out of my house. And I said, oh, this is my mom's house. And he is like, your mom's dead. Get the F out of my house. And then he stood up and I was like, okay, what I've been asking for. So I stood up, right? And, I'm like, and at the time, Barb and Seth was a baby and Seth started crying. And so Barb was like, oh, Mike, don't do this right now. Not in front of the kids. And I was like, okay, maybe later. So we leave and we go to the trailer behind with my grandmother, and his sister winds up coming over. So we're at my grandmother's trailer, whose daughter had just died. So my grandmother's upset. I'm fuming, right? Because I'm this big, angry Hulk of a guy. And I'm like, and his sister starts screaming out the back of their trailer. Keep in mind, they're in the trailer right in front. So they're juxtaposed, screaming, Michael Scott, don't come out. He's going to kill you. He's got all these guns and knives laid out. Don't come outside. And I'm thinking, I've been in the military. I know how to handle myself. I'll be fine. Right? Well, an hour later, she comes back banging on the door and she's like, Michael, you've got to come quick. I think he's dead.
What?
So here's some dad lore, right? So I go and I creep up the back porch, right, which was some rickety old stairs. If you've ever been in a trailer park, you know the back porch is not the pretty porch. It's the ugly porch. And it's halfway falling off, right? And so I go in the back door, and sure enough, I go inside, and there's no guns, but there was knives laid out on the counter. And I go to the bedroom, and there he is, laying on the ground, blue as a blueberry.
Wow.
And here's where the dad lore comes in. So here's this man that did everything possible, beat the crap out of me, locked me in storm cellars. You know, I had belt buckle bruises up and down my back growing up, right? It was awful.
Jesus.
Here's this man that all I wanted to do was to see him in this position my entire life, 30 years. And I gave him CPR, and I brought him back.
Wow.
And so when the ambulance came, they said, you saved this man's life. And so, you know, I always use that story when I'm talking to my kids about always making sure that you do the right thing, right? Yeah, regardless of the emotion of the environment, right? And the emotion was, oh, man, I just want to punch him while he's down. You know, it was like that was how I felt.
Sure, yeah.
You got to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So, you know, part of those life lessons that I kind of carry on, and all of these stories of how I grew up, I carry on to my kids so that they understand, like, hey, when bad things happen, it's okay. Make the right choice. And so in that instance, you know, I made the right choice. And, you know, I went to my mom's funeral 3 days later. I shook hands with him. We didn't say anything to each other. He left, moved back to Wichita Falls. I found out he died like 7 years later. But, you know, at least in my heart, in my soul, I knew, like, all right, you did the right thing, and forever you'll have this story to tell your kids when they come into circumstances that are emotionally set, that they can fall back on that dad lore and say, hey, am I making the right choice?
Yeah.
So,
Right. Did you ever find out how your mom really died?
No, never did.
Never did, huh? Okay. Well, that's got to be tough. You know,
it's one of those things where I assume it was an overdose. You know, and in my mind, I think that's okay, you know, and, you know, as we start talking about like what transpired with my kids and everything like that, and how later on in life, all of this kind of came back around to me, you know, when I look at that early phase of my life, right. And I look at all of those stories and the tragedies and, you know, the growing up, you know, in just a horrible environment. And then I look at all the successes that, you know, I've had in life and my kids have had in life and all of this great stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
But I look at it as, you know, and I don't want to get religious or spiritual or anything, but, you know, I always look at it as, you know, somebody, you know, some power, someplace was preparing me so that I had, you know, a connection to my children, so that when bad things happen to them, I had a frame of reference. Because oftentimes if you grow up and you've never had challenges, when your children or your friends or your family have challenges, you don't know what to do or what to say because you've never been there. Right. And so I was able to kind of let my kids know, like, hey, the stuff that you're going through, you'll survive.
Yeah,
you'll be okay. And you'll come
really
out
not
the other side because I did it. And so if I did it, it gives you a frame of reference that you can do it too.
Right on. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we'll get to it, but you have done like these amazing things, like where you started and where you're at now, and all the stuff that you've done is amazing. But I know we're not gonna have enough time to get to all of it, but let's move on a little bit. What did you go to middle school in Temple then?
Yeah. So it's funny. I went to Lamar Middle School for a year. Okay. And then I went to Emmanuel Lutheran, which is where Brian Skinner and I met. Okay. And we played. Now, here's another fun fact, right? 8th grade, I was 6 foot tall. Brian was 5'11". Emmanuel Lutheran, and we had 6 people on our basketball team. We had one play. It was called "Give the ball to Brian. If he misses, Mike, you go rebound."
Yeah.
And that was it, right? And so, and then freshman year, right? You know, I grew to like 6'3". Brian grew to like 6'5". You know, became long goody and all this stuff. But freshman year, you know, I felt like I was better than Brian, you know, because he was still, you know, kind of conditioning into his body and stuff. And
yeah, he was more of like a, what do you call it? A Great Dane fumbling around because he hadn't got there yet.
You know, this long-legged puppy, right? He was just running around. And, you know, so I always tell my kids, you know, when I talk about like the glory days of me, because I never quite achieved what I wanted to in basketball. Because when you're a freshman and you're 6'3", you're like, the glory days are all ahead, NBA. That wasn't meant for me. It was meant for Brian, right? And I remember,
well, there were so many good people in our era of Temple High School.
Smokey. I remember driving Smokey around because I was one of the few people on the basketball team that had a car, and it wasn't even my car. It's my grandmother's 1979 Ford Granada Ghia.
I remember that thing,
and it was yellow with a copper top. Right.
Yeah.
And I used to tell people like I was so cool I didn't need a cool car. Right. But what was awesome is, I hung out with all these great freaking athletes. Right. So I'd have a car with like, Gene Overton and, Troy Hudgens and, Smokey and freaking, Wheezy all in the car. Right. And so, we're driving around and it's like, hey, when all those guys get out of the car, something good's going to pop. Right. So those were good times.
Yeah.
No, those guys are great too, and it's so sad that we've lost so many of them. But I grew up with Wheezy. Because he went to Meredith and I did too, and he was very, very quiet. But man, he was so much fun. He introduced me to the Beastie Boys in 4th grade. He was just a good dude. I always loved Wheezy.
I loved Wheezy. I loved Pat Fisher. Shout out to Pat Fisher. Pat was the funniest. I remember freshman year. I don't know if you remember the President brothers, but Dutch and Monto.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So Dutch and Monto were on the varsity, right? So freshman year, it's me and Pat Fisher, and Pat was this tall, skinny guy, phenomenal basketball player. Even as skinny as he was, dude could just jump and hoop like nobody's business. But I remember, Dutch would always give us a cup check whenever we'd get on the bus, right? Just a little like, hey, are you wearing a cup? And of course, none of us were, and it hurt really bad. And I remember Pat being a freshman standing up to Dutch President and puffing out his chest and going, I don't bar you, Dutch. And I was like, oh my God. So Pat is not only the coolest guy, but also the bravest man to stand up to Dutch and Monto like that.
He was hilarious. My one quick story about Pat Fisher is we were on a field trip at what's the park that's out by the dam, Belton Dam?
Miller Springs.
Miller Springs. And we ride the bus all the way out there. That we get out, and I'm like, Pat, you've had that McDonald's in your hand the whole time. It's got to be cold now. And he looks at me and he unwraps it, takes a bite of it, and goes, I'm gonna eat it like it was hot. He was so funny, man. I love Pat.
He was the life of every party. Every room he walked in, he was the funniest guy around.
Yeah, he was always just cracking a joke or having fun with you or whatever. But yeah, I see Pat online all the time. Shout out Pat. And happy birthday, Skinner. It was yesterday. I don't know if you guys
and Brian, man, that guy. Of course, both of his parents were just phenomenal people. I remember us always trying to get Brian to go out late and, go to party, and his parents were like, nope. And Brian would go to school, and anytime Coach Miller was like, you boys go over to the football and, go to the gym and, lift, Brian was always in there lifting, while me and like Troy were kind of sloughing off, worried about the girls or whatever. Brian, you knew he was bound for stardom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and he's still doing it, man. He's a good dude. I actually talked to him real quick yesterday. I told him happy birthday. So you'd already mentioned, having a child early. So how old were you when? Oh wait, let me stop there. So the gal that you ended up marrying, her name was Barbara, and right. Barbara. Okay, you tell me if I'm wrong. Barbara came from a pretty financially challenged home, right?
Yeah.
And I just your kids, so you see things and you're like, okay, she's wearing the same clothes like every other day, whatever. But what I will say about Barbara is she was the sweetest thing, soft-spoken, and just a knockout beautiful girl. She was just such a sweet girl. But then you guys had a baby while y'all were still in high school, right?
Right. Yeah. So I had dated like the same girl from like, middle school to junior year. Right. And then funny how I met Barb was like the basketball team was telling me like, oh my God, Mike, you date the same girl, you just keep going back to the same girl, go find somebody new. Right. And I remember Thomas Davis picking me up and throwing me up against a locker. He was actually a guy that was bigger than me. And him and Gene Overton would tell me, like, you got to go out and start to flirt with other girls. And I was like, guys, I can flirt. And Barb had actually worked at Hollywood Video there off of 31st.
Right.
And I had went in there, and my line at the time was, do you have the Cindy Crawford workout video? Because I'm working on my ass. Now, granted, that didn't really play very well, but I do remember that, I came out and she had waved at me. And so I get back into the 1979 Ford Granada Ghia, and all my friends are like, what, they're like, oh my God, she waved at you. And I was like, that's because I'm the professor of Mac, and I was just like, and so that's kind of how we met. Well, and then, fast forward about 4 months later, right, she was pregnant. And so This was an interesting time in my life. As like I said, my parents, my mom and dad were 16 when they had me. And so, I'm like, wow, it's before my senior year in high school, but I need to do the right thing. So let's get married. Right. And, she never pressured that or anything like that. But I was like, let's do the thing. Right. And so my senior year was cut a little bit short. I, had enough credits to kind of graduate, but not necessarily, go through all of the fun of senior year. Yeah. I got married in 93. We graduated in 94. And, my beautiful daughter, Ashley, was born. I remember Scott Cheerhart, who is a professor at Centenary, was in the delivery room with me as my my best friend. And so
that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Scott Cheerhart, love that guy. He was phenomenal, right? One of my best friends growing up, and and so that kind of changed my life and my perspective, right? Because all of a sudden, I was this, pretty smart guy. I scored super high on the SATs and ACTs. I never really had to study too much. I was, not like the best athlete in the world, but I was like good enough, to do some cool things. And, I thought that life was just, out in front of me. Right. But I had to transition. And so I still wound up, going to Baylor because I thought I was going to go to med school. So I was working as a phlebotomist at the VA in Temple at 6 a.m. in the morning, and then going to Baylor, and then working as a bartender at night at the Applebee's at Baylor in Temple. And, that's kind of how, the first years of parenthood kind of went for me. And my daughter became pretty sick. And so I decided that, I wasn't going to med school. My GPA was pretty low at that point, right? So even though I was like a dual major and, driving back and forth from Temple to Baylor every day was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah,
but so I wound up joining the Army and to get my daughter some medical coverage. And the interesting thing about that is, they were like, hey, go take this ASVAB test. And as mentioned, right, I was a pretty good test taker back in the day. So killed that thing. And they were like, you can have whatever job you want. And they're like, we will put you as a physician's assistant back at Baylor. And, and then you can go that route. And I was like, wow. I don't think I want to do that because I don't want to be working for doctors, knowing that I would hold some type of resentment towards that field, because I would say, had I not made some of the mistakes that I made, or not mistakes, but had I not made some of the choices I made, I would be there, right? And I didn't want to hold that resentment, and I didn't want that pressure on myself. So I did what anybody does who watches movies ever. I decided that I wanted to go to the CIA, so I'm going to become an intelligence analyst. And so I went to join the Army, went to school to become an intelligence analyst. I actually was the distinguished honor graduate out of our cryptography program. And they said, Mike, you can have whatever duty assignment you want. You're the top of the class. And I was like, fantastic. I want to be in special forces. So I got my first orders were for 7th Group Special Forces and at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I was like, Barb, we're going to North Carolina, but I'm going to be spending all my time, out in the wilderness in South America fighting drug dealers.
Intrinsic Design is a residential and commercial building design firm with over 20 years experience working for local architects and builders. on various residential and commercial structures throughout Central Texas and beyond. Owned and operated by Michael Washam, you can reach him by phone at 254-913-5753 or by email at intrinsicdesign@gmail.com. That's NTRINSIC design@gmail.com. You can also check them out on Facebook.
How old were you at this point?
At this point, I was 21.
I was going to say, you could have had to be in early 20s.
Yeah,
okay.
so early 20s. So I've had a lot of life at this point. But then the funny thing about the Army is they own you, right? So no matter what your orders say, like, hey, I'm going to 7th Group Special Forces, when I actually got there for in-processing at Bragg, they said, oh, no, you're going to 18th Airborne Corps. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm Distinguished Honor Graduate. I'm Mike freaking Lee. And they're like, sorry, man, you're going over there. So, wow. I went to 18th Airborne Corps, which, put me in a decent spot, but I became, I was part of, the upper echelon of intelligence, right? So I handled the 82nd Airborne, the 101st Airborne, all the quick reaction forces. And so I supported intelligence for all of those guys. But the interesting thing is that when I was there, I was waiting on my security clearance, and, I'm at the shooting range, and I was a horrible shot, even though I grew up in Texas. But, again, grew up with grandmother, so I didn't know how to shoot a rifle. But on this day, I shot 39 out of 40 and qualified as an expert marksman. And my spotter was a guy named Sergeant Carlos Trejo. And he and I just talked for like 2 hours while we're on the range. And he was telling me about, he runs all the communications for the intelligence cell. And I was like, man, that's really cool. But, I'm going to the CIA. So, that's whatever, man. But when my security clearance finally came in, and, I had a choice to make, and I call this my red pill, blue pill moment, where they said, Mike, you can stay as an intelligence analyst. You're very well respected in your field, Distinguished Honor Graduate in cryptography, all this other stuff. But Sergeant Trejo wants you to go work with him. And I was like, you know what? I really like Sergeant Trejo. I don't know anything about what he does, but I like that guy. And so he wound up teaching me about telecommunications and all of this other stuff, and how packets would flow. And basically we would drop these things out of airplanes, and we would set up all of our intercept points, and and basically intercept everybody's communications and listen in. And
wow.
It was a fun time, and I learned a lot. And that's what led me to, Sergeant Trejo was retiring, and they're like, the next best guy in this field is, Mike Lee. We're going to send him to Bosnia. So I went to Bosnia for 9 months, and wound up blowing out my knee playing basketball, and put my kneecap on the back of my leg. And,
fun.
That was not a good day, because my kneecap's on the back of my leg, wasn't dunking or anything crazy, just a normal jump shot, came down, knee buckled inside completely, kneecap rolled all the way to the back.
Ouch.
I had to ride 30 miles to the Blue Factory, which was actually a Blue Factory we converted into a hospital. And I remember the doc saying, oh, this doesn't look good, but we're going to give you some Valium and some morphine, and this is going to hurt like hell. And he put a hand on my ankle and a hand on my knee and snapped my whole leg back into place.
Wow.
Then they determined that, well, Mike, you're mission critical because you're the only guy who does what you do, so we can't send you home. So for 3 months, I was in a straight leg brace with a flak jacket and, carrying an M16 and a Kevlar helmet, walking my way from Tent City up to, do all the intelligence processing while waiting for somebody to train in my field. And I remember when I returned back from my follow-up appointment, I went into the nurse and I was like, oh, Corporal Lee, I'm here to see blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh, I remember you're the screamer. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So that's kind of, the long story long of how I went from, being a doctor to a CIA agent to an intelligence analyst to telecommunications, and what led me into my current career of doing all things with, technology.
Okay. All right. That's just wild. Like the fact that we got it all in 35 minutes is even crazier, but because I know there's so much more. But at some point, didn't you say that you wrote books or did some patents or something along that line too?
So I became one of the top engineers in my field. So there's a certification program called a CCIE, and at the time it was one of the top. I think only like an 8% pass rate. it costs you $3,000 to take a 2-day exam and only 8% pass. Well, I wound up passing 3 different versions of that test, and became.
You're making me feel like the biggest idiot, and I feel like, and also that I feel like you've lived like 4 or 5 lives before you even got to this yet. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, and this is what's cool is I did all of that, and then you always have to recertify. But because I was so good at that test, they actually asked me to write the written exam, because you always had to take a written and a practical. So they asked me to write the written exam. So whenever I had to recertify, I recertified for 10 years. Taking a test that I wrote.
Wow.
Which was pretty funny. But then, being old kicks in, and I started getting 80s on a test that I wrote. So then I'm like, okay, I'm forgetting a lot more than I once knew. But yeah, so did that, and went and, started a business unit at Cisco on video conferencing, which was telepresence at the time, the immersive 65-inch plasmas, we actually were part of the initial group building, holographic presence. So I was part of a team that had built a telepresence system that allowed one of our executives in San Jose to walk virtually across a stage in India as a 1080p hologram and address an audience, which was
cool.
It's
really
like the
cool.
Tupac moment.
Yeah, so Tupac was actually based on a lot of that. Well, and all of that technology that I helped kind of develop, kind of led me to, I remember I was sitting on a telepresence call. I was the very first person to have, this was before video became a massive thing, I had a telepresence unit at my house, and my buddy, who was a former child martial arts TV star and everything, was like, hey, I know the producers of Ninja Turtles. Let me get you a call with these guys. And I was like, oh, dude, the guy's name was Ernie Reyes Jr. And I don't know if you know Ernie, but
I forgot that you were friends with Ernie. We met him at Bell County Comic Con. He was super nice to us.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so Ernie was there, and so this is my first time I'm meeting. So Seth is 5 years old at this time. I'm a single dad at this point, right? But I've got this cool technology that I helped invent, and I'm talking to the producers of Ninja Turtles. I'm kind of geeking out. I'm talking to Ernie, and Seth comes down. He's 5 years old, and he's dancing around in his underwear, his white underwear with a bowler hat and a fake mustache, dancing around behind me, which is normal. Everybody's experienced it during COVID, but back then that wasn't normal. So I'm like, Seth, get your ass upstairs, man. I'm on a call. He was like, oh, I thought you were talking to your friends. Well, Ernie was like, wow, your kid's got a lot of charisma. He goes, let me talk to him. This technology is awesome. So Seth talked to Ernie, and Ernie asked him about what you did. And Seth's like, I play soccer. And he's like, have you ever taken martial arts? And Seth was like, no. And he's like, let's use this cool technology to see if I can teach you a martial arts. And so he taught Seth a chop punch, spin chop punch over telepresence, 65-inch immersive video. And we figured that's the first remote martial arts lesson. And Seth took it from Ernie Reyes Jr.
That's awesome.
And then afterwards, Seth was like, oh, who was that guy? And I was like, oh, let me show you. Here's him beating up the Rock in the Rundown. Here's him in Ninja Turtles 2.
He's amazing.
And he was like, movie. I want to be like that. And I was like, all right, you're 5. I don't even know how to start. So my friend put me back in touch with Ernie. I called him. We connected very well, and he became Seth's mentor. He's still his mentor today. Matter of fact, Seth and Ernie, train together with some very high-end, affluent people that I can't really mention on the pod, but they train some really high-end people in martial arts to this day. Ernie and I wound up working together on several screenplays, a comic book. He and I are still best friends to this day. And, Seth would not be anywhere that he's at right now without, Ernie, but really without telepresence. So anytime we're talking to Seth, I'm like, yeah, everything that's great in your life, you're welcome, thanks to Dad, for telepresence.
I guess we should mention, I know it did before we started pushing record, but Mike is Seth Lee's dad, who we had on many episodes ago. If you guys remember, he was in London at the time. But anyway, so that all lines up. Y'all know what's going on.
Yeah, go back and listen to that episode if you haven't heard it. So
yeah, I wish I knew which number it was, but at 154, I can't remember anymore. I do want to take a step back to before we get into this last probably part. Is you and your wife have 3 kids, and you're still pretty young.
Still.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we were 32, and here's what I tell everybody about this story. And I'm an open book, and as well as my kids, we're all, kind of tell the story, right? At some point, you listen to all the successes I had, right? Which was great, right? But again, Barb became just a mom and didn't really feel like she had achieved that level of success. And keep in mind, at that time, my daughters were both, my middle daughter made the Olympic development team in soccer, and, they're super successful. So that kind of constant comparison, sure, kind of left Barb, in a secondary position. Right. And
right.
Through no fault of her own or anyone else's, it was the situation.
Yeah.
And so she had turned to, first painkillers in a really bad way. And then that became, more and more to where eventually she became addicted to crack. And it really, and I know a lot of people that probably listen to this know her. And I say this with all respect in the world for her, because again, she's the mother of my children, but it was a very challenging time, and so sure, I tried my best to help the situation. Matter of fact, my therapist said, you're kind of a narcissist, Mike, because you feel like you need to help and fix everything, and some things you can't fix. And it took me a while to, from a therapy perspective, to learn to let that go, right? And to say, I can't fix this, okay, and to focus on my children. Right. And so that's really where, whenever I cut that loose, I don't want to say that loose, but I cut that part of my life loose, and then just put all my attention into being a dad. Right. How am I raising Seth? How am I raising my two daughters? So I had no frame of reference on how to raise a daughter. Right. And they were both, I think when this happened, Seth was 5. Ashley had just, entered freshman year of high school, and Jen was in middle school. Right. So really challenging times for teenage daughters, and frankly, my son, and so it was a tough time for all of us. But again, I leaned on my experiences kind of growing up to say, you know what, you're all going to be okay. And the good news is I know how to talk to you and give you an example of people who can pull through this. And I know that you're going to. And so, we did that. And, for years I would try to keep tabs on like, hey, what's going on? Is she still, around and things like that? I haven't spoken to her in probably 10 years,
yeah,
and she's had no contact with the kids since Seth was 5. But, we still, and I always try to put myself in the situation with my children of, and I'm being very vulnerable right now, but I put my children first in everything. And I always told them, like, I don't want to speak ill of your mom, because at some point, had she gotten her life turned around or made the choice to do that, I don't know if it became impossible, with drugs and addiction, especially at that level, there comes a time where there really isn't a turning back. Right. And so I think she kind of lost that ability to turn back, which is tragic.
Yeah.
But there is a part of me that was always like, if she ever does, she and I would never be together. Right. That part was done, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Parents get divorced all the time.
Yeah.
But I did eventually want that for my daughters, especially to, understand like, oh, my mom got better and she reconciled, and what that would look like. Now, on the flip side, they took the same approach again. Everything in life is choices, not environment, right? So when I was able to give them the example of I grew up without fatherly figures and I became just a dedicated dad, I watch my daughters become the most amazing mothers you'd ever see.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know I see pictures of your kiddos from time to time on Facebook, or I'm friends with Seth on social media and whatever.
Yeah.
And not trying to get any tears or anything, but every time I see them, I see Barbara in them. Like see they really have a lot of her features. And
well, I tell Seth all the time, right? Because Seth is 6'1", but he's broad shoulders, got this V cut and all this other crazy stuff. And I'm like, you kind of hit the genetic lottery, because Barb had great genetics, but you got my height and bone structure. So,
Well, I know you're a proud dad because I see you post, and then I go, and then I'll be the weird guy. I'll go look and see what they're doing, and your kids have just been really successful. They have done they're doing some really cool stuff. So I do want to point that out to you.
It's a fun life, but like I said, the greatest accomplishment is like watching my children become parents themselves, and how they've taken all the tragedy. Because again, history repeated itself. I grew up very bad situation. They had some bad situations fall to them. I was able to kind of help bridge that gap, hopefully, and give them examples, but they still had, things bad happen to them, and they pulled through, and they became amazing people. Right. And that's what I tell everybody. Is always like, Mike, you're such an amazing dad. And I'm like, I just got lucky because I got amazing kids that, make the right things. And, we could talk for 5 hours about Seth's life growing up in LA and all the exposure he had to the young Hollywood party scenes and things like that, and how I adjusted to that. But at the end of the day, right, when people think about Mike or all the accomplishments, or he did all this, and I'm still, making an impact in the industry, and it's great, kudos, and it boost of ego all the time, at work and stuff like that. But the greatest accomplishments that I've ever had in life is those 3 kids.
Sure, yeah. Do you ever find time for yourself though? Because I've heard you talk about anything to do with you. You know what I mean? Like you, without involving your kids or grandkids or whatever.
Honestly, people have asked me that a long time, and I have found such joy in just being present with my family that is my exposure. Now granted, do I like a game of chess occasionally? Sure, I love, it's funny, summer movie season is coming up, right? I'm a big movie buff guy. So going to the movies, I used to take the kids to the movies every week. We would map out which movies we're going to see. And that was kind of our family thing, and we would always play the trailer game, right? So this is how I got Seth involved in like the movie business. Was we were like, okay, based on release dates of future upcoming releases, based on the production company, all 3 of my kids would have to pick which trailer was going to play first. And in order to analyze that, you had to know what was coming out. Was there any tie to the production company? And then was there genre ties? And then we always had to play what's playing first, because the biggest budget always plays last because there's more butts and seats.
Sure.
So it was always more of a challenge to say which trailer is going to play first. So we would go every week to the movies and play the trailer game.
I like this. I like that.
Yeah.
That's funny. Just for the sake of time, just touch a little bit on Seth. We've had him on the show, so we know a lot of what he's done. But how cool is it to see him do what he's done?
It's amazing. And now he's got, and this is post, but now he's like writing music. He's got an EP coming out.
Yeah.
So here's a kid that has walked the red carpet with Ben Affleck in front of the Chinese theater. Lived in Paris and was the face of a high-end fashion brand, and walked runways in Paris and New York, and was on a hit television show with Samuel Elliott, and just all of those cool things that he's done in his life. And and even with that, he still has maintained like humility. And and then what makes me the most proud is how he's responded to because the entertainment industry sucks as far as like you have to be mentally tough, because it's constant rejection, right? You go out for 15 auditions, you may get a bite on one, right?
Right. Yeah.
And there's been numerous times where Seth has been close to a big project where they're like, oh, you're in the final 2 and this is going to be life-changing. And, you're in the final 2, but you weren't the final 1,
Yeah.
Or he sees success of his friends that he's comparing, because he's got a lot of successful friends as well. And he's learned to kind of adjust and not be comparative in that, because it's all based on your time, when it's your time. And so but he did have like tragedy strike where, he was late diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and, I almost lost him.
Yeah.
I had to take him to the ER, and he was 109 pounds and was in a coma, and came out of that and was like, okay, this is going to change your life because it's type 1. You're going to have to take insulin every day of your life. And here's this kid who's done all these amazing things, but just like, okay, how do you respond to that? And he took it on himself. I mean, the kid started eating, 200 grams of protein every day, and built himself back up. And, he went from 6'1", 109 pounds back up to 6'1", 155, put himself back on the map. he moved to London. He's still doing, getting picked up for all these gigs. He's got some new magazine articles coming out. He just, booked a new feature film that's coming out. He's releasing music. So I love the resiliency of the kid, right? Of just, and especially when you book something big like The Accountant and all the acclaim that he got for that film when he was 12 years old, and the joke was Anna Kendrick sang you happy birthday for your 12th birthday. I mean, that was
awesome.
And I used to joke with him. I was like, you peaked at 12, Seth, and I meant that always as a joke. Right. But, when all of that acclaim was thrust on him at such an early age, he thought he would be much further along. So it's been an interesting ride of maintaining his positive attitude and his, consumption, and his obsession with this creative field. And, I just love that nothing sets him back, right? Diabetes isn't setting him back. COVID didn't set him back. He's still finding ways to thrive. And, we know that eventually that next big thing is going to hit and he's going to have all the things that he wanted in life. But the things that he really wants in life is what he already has, which is to go do creative things and live a cool life and have great friends and do all these amazing things and have great dad lore stories of his own so that when he grows up, he's going to be able to tell his kids about, there was that time that I did this, and everybody's going to sit back and go, oh my God, you did all of that before you were 23.
Right. Yeah.
And so
I have followed him a lot because I know you and I got that tie and his mom and all that stuff. It's like, I follow Seth pretty close, not real close. I'm not weirdo close or anything, but
no. He showed up. He lives a public life.
He showed up on, what was it? 1883. Is that?
Yeah.
He showed up on that. I had no idea he was on that show. He shows up and I'm like, what the, I know that kid. What the hell? My wife and my kid are thinking, yeah, okay, whatever. And I'm like, no, that's freaking Seth Lee. He surprised me on that one.
It's been interesting because again, outside of my relationship with Ernie, right? He's just gotten such exposure to, all of these great people, like Ben Affleck. Everybody was like, oh, he's a jerk, blah, blah, blah. No, he was the coolest guy. He was always, kind of mentored Seth, and they went to autistic classes, together, right. And they learned, but it's always been like, he's been right on the cusp, and a lot of times, you'd see people that get close, right? You hear of all these stories of actors who quit, and he's just not quitting. It's just like, it's not in his DNA. Right. And, he's, I tell him all the time, as like, I never want you to wait tables, because waiting tables isn't going to get you to where you need to be. So if you take a job to pay the bills, make sure it's taking a job that's going to help you get where you need to be. Right. And you can always lean on me. Right. And so, I try to make sure that, my resources and, my ability to build relationships with people, because now I'm friends with like producers and, right. agents and, all of these other people. So, we all just kind of work together. And then, I try to make sure like, hey, Seth, whatever you need to drive yourself to where you want to be, you've always got me there.
I think Seth just got a lot of his daddy in him. I think that's what it is.
he's been around me enough to pick up a few things here and there.
So kind of closing out, what do you do now? Like, what are you currently doing?
Yeah. So right now I lead network services for a company called Freddie Mac. So I, and the beautiful thing about this is I still consider myself a transformative, technical strategist, right? So, I try to look at things from a different perspective of what are the challenges that companies face. And I did this at JP Morgan, which I left to come over to Freddie Mac. And I looked at challenges that they had and I said, okay, how can I fix this, right? What's the future look like? And I try to mentor people into, when looking at technology, don't look at where you are today and don't look at where things are going tomorrow. Look at where things are going after tomorrow and try to drive towards that. Because if you're driving towards tomorrow, you're already too late. Technology evolves too fast.
Right.
So, while everybody was gathering up on AI and things like that, I'm already trying to look at what's the next thing after that. Right.
Right.
And so, that's kind of what I do. And I try to tell everybody that, the biggest thing that I do with people is I try to mentor them and tell them that, all of my people, it's funny. I went through a period of like 5.5 years where I had no attrition on my team because nobody wanted to leave, and I was like, that really made me feel good because I've grown some really strong technologists, right? And some really strong people. And I've helped guide a lot of careers that have gone on to do some amazing things, right? So that same philosophy that I take into my family, I take that into the workplace as well. And again, I share all the stories with the work as well. And, I just try to help mentor that next generation and say, look, I've already done these really cool things. I want you to do those cool things, right? So, when I look at myself as an executive and as a leader and things like that, it really, all of that stuff is great. I mean, I make great money and I get to do cool things, and I've got a lot of respect in the industry and all that's great. But really, what I love doing is mentoring that next junior engineer. Who's the next Mike Lee? Who's the next guy that we can bring up and put their name in lights and have them write books or go do speaking engagements around the world like I did. Travel and go get patents and go, help set the standards for where the industry is headed. That's what I want to see other people achieve in their life. Because right now, I just want to be Grandsire Knighthawk to my grandkids and do that next chapter. So like you said, I've got lots of chapters in the book of Mike's life, and they're all amazing, right? I kind of look at it at LeBron's career. Somebody once said, like, you could break LeBron's career into 4 different sections and he'd be a top 10 NBA player in all 4, right? And so I look at, whether it was my early life, my Army life, my technology life, my dad life, my actor's dad life, my grandfather life, all of those different lores and stories and all of that cool stuff that I've done, have all just been chapters that, I want people to be able to extract what they need.
That's awesome. Right on.
Yeah.
My last question I do want to ask you, where did the Grandsire Knighthawk come from?
Okay. So my daughter, so Jen, my middle child, who's, like I said, my daughters are just freaking amazing moms, like amazing. And Jen, when she told me she was pregnant, and we were talking about, she was like, well, you can be whatever grandfather name you want. And I was like, oh, do I want to be a pop, a poppy? What do I want to be? And we were watching House of Dragon. And I remember, like, the king was, and all the grandkids were fighting. And he's like, I am the grandsire. And he threw down his old cane.
Yeah.
I want to be a grandsire. But then Step Brothers is my favorite movie, right? So, I also was like, you can call me Dragon, you can call me Nighthawk. So then I was like, I want to be Grandsire Knighthawk. Because I thought, when I go pick up Zoe at school and my, GT63, I'm, she's like, oh, my Grandsire Knighthawk's picking me up. She's going to be the coolest kid in school.
Nice.
And so, but it's evolved because, Zoe is 3 and she can't say Grandsire. So she calls me Sandsire. So now I'm Sandsire. She FaceTimes me even though we live a block away. She FaceTimes me and is like, Sandsire. I'm like, Zoe, Toaster, what's up? So
that's awesome.
Nice.
Grandsire Knighthawk is
Grandsire Knighthawk. That's free. When I was thinking Nighthawk for the first time, I was like, why is he naming himself after a TV dinner?
Good call. I like where you're headed.
But hey, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. I know there's a lot more, but that was, like I said, it's like you've lived 4 or 5 lives, dude. I mean, it's holy crap.
It's been interesting, right? And we're just hitting that next phase of our lives, where we're in hitting 50, and what's that next life look like, and that next piece, and and I do look back and I'm like, wow, I've when I in my ledger, right at the end of my life, they're gonna be like, man, this guy did some really cool things and had some great accomplishments individually. But I don't want people to look at the individual accomplishments. I want them to look at the peripheral accomplishments of what did his kids do? Were they great parents? And not just like, oh, wow, Seth is in a great movies. I want people to remember Seth as that humble kid who, had the world at his feet and had tragedy hit him, and he overcame it, right? Yeah. That's what I want people to remember about, Seth or my daughters or me for that instance.
Right on. All right. All right, man. You made me feel this big. Thanks. So, but again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I know that was a lot of I can never say that word.
It's vulnerability, but it's not really because vulnerability means like, you're opening yourself up for attack.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that way. I feel like it's just being honest, right?
Yeah, and that's how I'm the same way. It's like
it's like I'm going to be honest. If people ask me about XYZ, I mean, there will be some things, especially with my kids, that I try to like, that's kind of taboo, and I protect them. Like, for instance, like when you ask me like, hey, do I want to ask Seth about like the mom? I'm like, let's. But me. Sling arrows, whatever we need to do, let's, I try to be an open book. Yeah.
It's really a part of your story, and it actually is a big part of your story when it comes down to it. But anyway, thank you.
Temple Wildcats forever, man. With
blue front, white back.
Blue front, white back magic, man.
Magic. Yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with us for a whole hour, man. We really appreciate it. Of course, over where you're in California, it's only 7 something. It's 9 something.
It's 7:11, but I do have a 5 a.m. conference call, so I have to get up at 4:40 in the morning to jump on video, because you don't look this good at 5 a.m. on a conference call without about 20 minutes to get ready.
Fair enough. Well, again, thanks so much. Everybody always go to randomnesspodcast.com to check out everything. There should be new shirts up. And when I say new shirts, new design shirts, something different. So go check that out.